my brother just told me.
Jay, why are we laughing so much?
How many years, John?
I started teaching Hamlet when Lyndon Johnson was president.
And she says, I met the youthful Lord Paris at Lawrence's cell and gave him what becoming love I might, not overstepping the bounds of modesty.
No, I already did that with the
I
other guy.
should say that.
One of the great things about teaching books like this is that you have to sort of come to grips with the fact that it's beyond you.
Him and Beowulf and...
But you know, when he dies, he's like desperate to be remembered. Tell my story. Remember me. Remember. All right, Jay, good to see you again today.
What's going on, Paul?
Should we be doing this? Should we stop right now?
No.
All right. Hey, Jay, how you doing?
Hey, Paul.
All right. Good to meet back up again
Good.
and keep trucking. We are, we're not at the end of the Odyssey yet, but we're at the halfway mark. We've made it to the halfway mark. It's been, was it 11 years ago we started this? I can't remember. And we are now at the halfway.
Yeah. I just eclipsed book 12 with my students, and I said to one group of students, we are officially at the Bon Jovi point. Now, one of my freshmen, they're born 14 years ago, he goes, oh, halfway there, living on a prayer. And it took me all my power to just not give him all the extra credit in the world.
All the extra credit you had left in your bag. Wow. Yeah, I didn't get that.
Talk about the Odyssey and Bon Jovi in one fell swoop. It's my guy.
And have a kid who can. That is shocking.
Yeah.
That's one way to evaluate the population of a school.
Emailed his parents. Yeah, I should have emailed his parents. Maybe I will, and just say, like, you should write a parenting book.
Yeah, you're
He's
doing it
also a
right.
great kid.
You are doing it right. Whatever else happens.
The dude can read ancient poetry, and he appreciates 80s hair bands. What else do you want? So anyway, we're at the halfway point.
Yeah. So that's good. Chapter 12, Sea Perils and Defeat. So we'll keep going along with our same sort of lineup. I got sort of three things I want to hit on. I like my last one better, my lingering question, best of all for today. But we'll try to do those in order. But before we start out, I hope you have a poem for us today. Jay, do you have one?
I actually unearthed a poem about Scylla and Charybdis.
Oh my gosh. It's not from the police.
And it's
Sting. They have a line caught between the Scylla and Charybdis. Yeah.
I know. This is by a woman named Megan. This is by a woman named Megan Fernandez, and this was published in the New Yorker in August of 2019.
Okay.
And it's a poem about Scylla and Charybdis, and she has a really creative title. It's called Scylla and Charybdis. It's from her collection, Good Boys. So I just found this today, and the premise is like connecting Scylla and Charybdis to her having to stay in New York while her partner, I don't know if it's a boyfriend or husband in the poem, is on like a really nice vacation. So it's interesting. She connects those two things. But anyway, it's a poem called Scylla and Charybdis by Megan Fernandez. I like when the choices are both ugly, the rock and the hard place. Odysseus chose Scylla, and I, too, would have opted for a terrestrial evil, the sea vortex probably concealing some subterranean meat with its beauty. Soon, you and I will exist in different time zones. While day breaks for you, night will hold me to the big wild moon. I cast a wakeful light unraveling across the ocean, while you swim in open Spanish waters, brushing the bright-eyed fish. I spin in a street of yellow cars, nod off to an organ in a small church on Broadway. When you face the queen Medusas in the water, transfixed by their pale, rosy pulses, their accusatory look of afterlife, know that you are facing me. I am them in hundreds, blind and mutant, ready to greet and interrogate your days. These hallucinations are such a small price for your face. I keep myself busy and disoriented, I trace our disappearing homelands through myth. I understand now that to love radically is to always be willing to be banished to some disfigured island of stone in the middle of the sea, a small sacrifice, really. I, too, might have sacrificed a few men to preserve the whole idea of a voyage, or even a nation. Both false beloveds. That's the thing. Our hero didn't really want to go down with the ship. Wily, he skidded the sea cosmos. He knew the milk foaming at the whirlpool's edge was bad medicine and chose the lesser of two omens, a prophecy where the weak get plucked and you sail on home fine, just fine.
My goodness.
Right?
It's like a memoir in the patois
Oh,
of the Odyssey.
yeah. I gotta maybe get one of her books or something. I really dug
Golly.
that. Yeah.
Who was she? Who was she? Was she Penelope or was she Odysseus? I could. She seemed to go back and forth and compare herself to both.
Yeah, it's
She
so
was
good.
banished on a rock, out of the ocean.
Yeah. So anyway, I
Wow,
thought you'd appreciate that.
I did like
I
that.
have
I
a
got to read
love-hate
it.
relationship with New Yorker poems. Sometimes I feel like they publish poems that are like intentionally so opaque and
Yeah,
but
yeah,
I've seen just absolute amazing poems that I love and can share with students in there too. So it's hit or miss. That's what I
yeah.
love about modern literature is like we get to do the sifting, right? To determine what's good and what we don't think is good. So
It's true. It's a little freeing, right? You don't feel as free, with the
yeah,
canonical stuff, even though you should,
yeah,
but you don't. It is
yeah,
nice. Yeah, that's good. That's good
yeah,
out
yeah.
from that. I had a hard break with the New Yorker probably about 10 years ago. So we're still not talking. And that's good to hear something from them. All right. There's our opening poem, Megan Fernandez, Scylla and Charybdis. Very thoughtful reflection on the Odyssey. And honestly, it kind of relates to my lingering question, which I'll bring up when we get there. A line in that poem, so that might be helpful. Well, let's start out with what we do. Although, Jay, it might be helpful to have just a briefest. Can you place us?
Yeah.
Where are we? Just sort of,
Yeah.
narratively, geographically in this story. Where did we leave off last episode?
Yeah. So book 11, books 9 to 12 feature Odysseus telling his autobiography to the Phaeacians, to Alcinous and the Phaeacians, who have kind of rescued him and taken care of him. So we're never sure what's true and what's not, but we're taking it at face value, I guess. And we've just left. Odysseus has just told the story of leaving the underworld, where he's told sort of his future. And now so book 12 begins. He returns to Xerxes' island of Aia. And he does what he said he was going to do in Hades. He agrees to bury Elpenor. You need a proper burial to have a full afterlife. He buries Elpenor. Xerxes gives him some warnings about what he's going to confront on his way home, which largely involve the sirens, Scylla and Charybdis. He eventually is marooned on the island of the sun god. He's been directed not to eat their cattle. Terrible things happen. You can see this coming. And he upsets the sun god, who threatens Zeus to just not shine light on the world anymore. So Zeus destroys all of Odysseus's men, all of them. Odysseus barely survives, floats along, barely surviving for 10 days, and lands on the island of Ogygia, back with Calypso. So the story has come full circle. We met him in book five at Ogygia, and that's where Odysseus ends his story to the Phaeacians. So it's my contention that we might learn the most about Odysseus in book 12.
Wow, really?
Yeah,
I would
yeah,
not have.
maybe.
I didn't think you were going to say that, but that we can learn the most about him. Okay, that sounds interesting.
I think he's really elusive because he's numerous people. He's
Yeah,
very chameleon-like and opportunistic, and he's just out to survive. So I used to be way more judgmental of him, and now I'm partially judgmental. But I think a lot of his conditioning is I need to survive right now, and I'm going to say and do whatever I need to do to say and to just survive right now. But I think there's a few really peculiar. He admits some things that are really interesting, and I think some supernatural characters say things to him that are really interesting. So I'm going to hopefully dig into that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. And yeah, I was thinking of some of your judgmentalism or your judgments, not judgmentalism, but just judgments of Odysseus in past episodes as I was reading back through for today's podcast, because we have taken some shots at him for his care of his men or the lack thereof, for his own search for glory and how he risks other people's lives for that. And this is the chapter in which all the other men die, as you said. So a question, if you're thinking about that and thinking about responsibility, the question of his responsibility for that is going to come up in this chapter. And I think it is handled. And so, I mean, that's something that as you're teaching the students, it's a great route to go, because one of the things that's surely on the table as you're reading this is Odysseus admirable? Is he actually heroic or not, in a way that we can appreciate, for our time and for now. And so if he's careless, sloppy, if he's only self-centered, and men die because of that, then, it's tough to look at him as a hero, if that's what you find. So, okay, that's good. I think those things are on the table. So we want to start off with, what do we start off with? The obvious, and
kind of an obvious passage that we have to talk about this. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
What do you have, Paul?
Well, for my obvious passage, that we definitely have to talk about is, I guess I file this under obvious. It's what stands out to me most in the chapter about Odysseus's character, which is really Circe's judgment of Odysseus. When Odysseus comes back from the underworld, stays up all night with Circe chatting, and she gives him something closer to driving directions for how to get back home. Tells him sort of the features of the world, the facts of the world that he's going to have to navigate in order to get back home, the choices he's going to have to make. It's somewhat moral in that sense, but nothing like the prophetic direction that Tiresias gives him. In answering the question, how do you get back home? Tiresias and Circe answer those two questions entirely differently. In Circe's hows focus on look out for this danger, look out for this, for this pothole kind of thing in which you could fall and never come back out. But Odysseus's response to that, and that is kind of related to the question you're talking about, his character, what we might learn about his character is, whatever trouble you've got in this world, whatever perils you're describing, I'm going to take them on. I've got a sword, I've got a shield, I've got my intellect, my wit. When she tells him, you'll have to choose, and men will die. There's nothing you can do about it. He's like, nuh-uh. How about I just take, I can stop that. You should have seen me back in the cave, with the Cyclops. And so that line, I guess the scene where she sort of rebukes him for that, bottom of page 212 in the Fitzgerald edition, where she asks him, must you have battle in your heart forever? The bloody toil of combat, old contender, will you not yield to the immortal gods? That nightmare cannot die. The Scylla, being eternal evil itself, being horror and pain and chaos. There is no fighting her. There's no power can fight her. All that avails is flight. So what she describes in the Scylla is that you're going to have to feed the Scylla if you go that route. Six men. That's it. There's nothing you can do about it. Odysseus's response is to fight or to outwit, but she brings him a reality check, which he has to take, and says, you can't fight it. It's blind force, essentially. I think we would call it evil. And it's a reality in the world, and you have to stay away from it. Wise people run away from it. They don't stick around and say, I can mess around with with crack cocaine and I'll be okay. You're like, no, it's force. You won't. And so I think that's a scene, to me, is a big sort of obvious scene where he has to confront the reality that he's going to suffer in this chapter and accept it. And I think he does in this.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I would start there. I don't know if that's the passage you had in mind.
It's related, actually. I think I have like three tiny things that go together as one thing, and I'm wondering. We have this conversation in class. Is Odysseus a good leader or not? And can a good leader also lie to his subordinates, or do you always have to tell the truth? You know, and a kid made the example this year of sometimes a really good coach, when he knows a kid is struggling and isn't doing a good job but is trying really hard, has to maybe exaggerate what the kid is doing to just pump him with confidence to keep going. Which I thought that was like, from a teenager's point of view, that's like a good analogy. Like, it's not really like an insidious lie, but like they're familiar with the fact that, like, you know, people don't tell the literal truth all the time, and it's not necessarily to be bad. But in the Emily Wilson, I'm not even going to read this whole thing, but she gets the word from Tipsy about Scylla and Charybdis, but he only mentions the sirens. So he intentionally doesn't tell them about Scylla and Charybdis.
Yes.
And in 224 of the Wilson, he says, Odysseus is narrating this to the Phaeacians, admitting this out loud. He said about his guys, they promptly followed orders. I did not mention Scylla since she meant inevitable death. And if they knew, the men would drop their oars and go and huddle down in the hold in fear.
Yeah.
So again, on the one hand, it's a bold-faced lie. On the other hand, it's complete obedience to the mission, which is to get home and you do anything, including sacrificing 6 guys. But the passage that sticks out to me the most is when Scylla, this is around 245 of the Wilson. It's not a long passage. It's just we find out Odysseus learns what's going to happen. He doesn't say it to his men so that they have courage enough to sail. And then Odysseus says this: Scylla snatched 6 men from the ship, my strongest, best fighters. Looking back from down below, I saw their feet and hands up high as they were carried off. In agony, they cried to me and called my name, their final words. And then a great epic simile. So I always tell my students, pay attention to epic similes. It's like when the soundtrack of a movie gets louder. That's what Homer does. So the guy's feet dangling as Scylla's eating them. He describes that like when a fisherman out on a cliff casts his long rod and line set round with oxhorn to trick the little fishes with his bait. When one is caught, he flings it, gasping back onto the shore. So those men gasped as Scylla lifted them up high to her rocky cave, and at the entrance ate them up, still screaming, still reaching out to me in their death throes. And here's 2 of the most important lines in the poem, I think.
Okay.
That was the most heart-rending sight I saw in all the time I suffered on the sea.
Yeah.
Now, considering what Odysseus has seen, it's not like me. I've been on a couple of whale watches, Paul. I haven't seen much on the sea. Odysseus has seen a lot, right? So I just find it really interesting. We had a really interesting deep dive on this in one of my classes. Like, why would this be the thing that breaks him? And I can't help but to believe that he knows that he orchestrated their death preemptively. And I don't know if that's ever happened before. Like, he brought, 700 or so guys to the Trojan War, and in a variety of times on the way home, whether it was the Cicones, whether it was the Cyclops, whether on and on and on.
Yeah.
Things happen, but it's not like he preemptively planned their deaths. This was the only time he knew 6 of my guys are going to die today, and I chose that on purpose so that we can get home. And I just find Odysseus, and the other thing, like dramatically, that I find interesting is his admission of this to relative strangers. Like, you want to know when my heart broke? It's this. Like, that's that either says a lot about the Phaeacians' hospitality, or maybe it says a lot about how much he knows he's utterly dependent on them, that he has to say things like I think dramatically, and it creates a dramatic context that's really fascinating. But I don't know, to have a...
I mean, what do you think he thinks about it? I mean, do you and that comes through from that line. And in the Fitzgerald translation, it's line 334. It's definitely worth marking and hovering over if you're going to cover this chapter. From your understanding of his personality, of his character up until now. I mean, why does he say that openly? What do you think he thinks of it? Do you think his hands were tied, so he's innocent?
I go back and forth on that question. I think it's a really essential one. I always think up until now, he's always had ulterior motives. He's always wondering. He always has an angle. He always is wondering what other people's angle. Part of me wonders, has he been with the Phaeacians long enough that he feels a tinge of safety?
Yeah.
In order to be this vulnerable, plus he's becoming a sort of full human being, maybe in the hopes that they'll help him get home. Maybe.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like
some vulnerability.
If he's a merciless killer, okay, I'm a merciless killer, take me home. That's different than, I've strategized with the Cyclopses, I've been to Hades, but you know what really broke me was this. Like, that broke me. So part of me wonders, I still think he has an angle, but I think his angle is actually to manipulate his own vulnerability to get help.
So you still think it's manipulation? This still feels manipulative to you. So you don't read it straight. You don't read him with like he's being genuine and saying this was awful. This felt extremely awful. You think he's still, like later we're going to see, he's going to angle to get a coat on a cold night. This is him angling to get a ride back home.
I have no evidence that he's suddenly like a vulnerable, sensitive 21st century guy, like all of a sudden. Like, no, and I don't, and I really don't blame him for having an angle because he's a soldier and mission is first. Missions get on.
Yeah.
If me saying this is the way to do that. I also think there's a really good chance it has the added benefit of being true, which he's very rarely telling the truth. So it makes sense that these deaths would break him in two because he knows he chose them.
Right. But but he says, deathly pity ran through me. And in other places, like the example, I could think of this coming up in a few books, where he gets, where he angles for a coat on a cold night. We are sometimes told when he says he's played. I don't know. I wouldn't be able to think through many examples to say always, but I know often we are told when he's angling for something or working a line, and so that definitely is not there. But I mean, it's when you say he orchestrated this, that sounds a little strong to me. I mean, he chose between the rock and the hard place. He chose the rock. What was the other choice?
I don't blame him for choosing to lose 6 rather than all.
Right.
I'm more saying that, like, whenever Odysseus, one of the choruses of this poem is him going to different places, and this includes when he returns home to Ithaca, being told to give an account of himself. Yes. I think he's very intentional about when he's a storyteller, about what to include and emphasize and what to diminish and delete. And I think he's really brilliant at knowing how to shape a story to his advantage. Yes. He's always been that way. So I presume that's the case here. I have no reason not to presume that.
That's right. And that is being a responsible reader, I think, too, even if you don't want to throw too many rocks at him, still, that is what you learn about him, that is one of the skills that he has. When the poet who's telling us the story says he's skilled in all ways of contending, that is one of the ways. It's in talking in a way that accomplishes a goal, or act in a way that accomplishes a goal. He's not simply just living, instinctively. Yeah. He's thoughtful and reflective. So you're right. It is a part of his action, but it's a great line that stands out. I have it underlined. It's a great place to go. Pity ran through me. Fitzgerald has it. That sight, far the worst I ever suffered. It's a Fitzgerald translation. Yeah. Far the worst. Yeah. So, okay.
And I also think that's the first. I have like a few key things. I have an obvious passage, a subtle passage, and a lingering question, all of which I feel suggest things about the heart of this man right now. Like, not the external trickster, we don't know who he is, the protean Odysseus who's just surviving moment to moment, but like something in his core. And this is the first one, right? Like, if you say to me, the moment in my life where my heart broke the most was this. Like, that's
Yeah.
incredibly vulnerable for anybody to share that.
Right.
So, um,
Right.
anyway, that's
Well,
like
that's good.
step
I
one
mean,
of
sure, and that's good if we take it that way, as that first place, and it is the first place is mentioned. Then it seems like the right place for the captain of a ship, for the leader of men, to feel that is at the point which he lost men, but in a particular way, in a way in which there was nothing he could do. I mean, that's what Circe tells him. That's what I think
yeah,
he brings himself. Although emotionally or spiritually he's not there, but experientially, he sure
yep,
was. He brought himself around to having to realize that's just what's going to happen. That is the reality
yep,
on the ground, and he just has to accept it. That is not in his character, I don't think, and
yeah,
I could be wrong about that, but that feels like something he has been brought to having to accept. I don't know if you want to say that he learns that or develops this character, because I don't feel like he develops his character really at all in this book, but that might come the closest to it is in this scene where he has to accept. So, all right, so that's sort of maybe two obvious places you can go for obvious things. What Kirke tells him, or Circe tells him, your nature here to always fight and to draw the sword, either the sword of your mind or the actual sword on your waist, is not going to work. Put it away and sit back and watch 6 of your men
yep,
die, because that's what's about to happen. And then your point here to his character, and it is a pathway. It's an opening into his character, which you should be looking for. These, as you go through the book, is that line. This was deathly pity ran through me, far the worst. So that's great, and those are, I think, big obvious places. I think to move then to the next thing. My subtle point is it's a little bit of cheat in the sense that it's not super different. But I think the subtle point inside of this, of the big obvious point, is that Odysseus is introduced to, maybe in a different way, to forces that he cannot fight against, that you might call reality, you might call the nature of things, that against which you benchmark expectations for yourself or for the world. It's that sort of that principle of, you think your life is terrible, but once you grow and mature, you begin to develop that question, compared to what? And you can develop that comparison thing to, what's your expectation? Did you think it was going to be all whatever? This is that in the journey home, despite all the sufferings, bad things happen, but there's a whole different kind of thing that happens, and that is a thing that's entirely out of your control. That's nature. That's reality. That's, in a sense,
yeah,
God. That over and against the gods, sort of weirdly, in this book, that Odysseus has the spirit, which I applaud, to push against, to find out if he's run into that or not, because it's easy to just quit and give up when you shouldn't.
mhm,
But that, when found, you have to submit to. You have to.
yeah,
You have to give over to, and ironically, in choosing the Scylla, he ends up really getting both. Right, when his ship is
yep,
destroyed, he's washed back toward the Charybdis, and hangs on, as Homer says, like a bat on the bottom of a branch, just like perching,
yep,
waiting for his keel and driftwood, the flotsam that is saving his life, to shoot
yep.
back up, and so he can float home ignobly. So he kind of gets both. That's part of the deeper reading of the between the rock and a hard place. When you're there,
Yeah.
you're going to get both
The
of them.
whole what you were saying before too is interesting about the acceptance of this reality. I
Yeah,
find that one of the fascinating elements of epic, and I'm thinking of the ones I know best, the Iliad, the Odyssey, Paradise Lost, Beowulf, Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, which are, I think, epics in the way we would understand them.
yeah, sure.
That they feature significant characters who are bold and heroic as their context defines it, but they're constantly at odds and at tension with a force that's greater than themselves. And some of their heroism seems to be grounded in actually choosing to accept a force that's greater than themselves. So whether that's the
Absolutely.
power of the ring, the actual force, God's providence, weird and Beowulf, like whatever you name that thing.
Yes.
It's a great article. There's a lot of articles on Beowulf saying, here's the power of fate or here's the power of providence. And there's one, and I'm forgetting which one it is, but it connects to what we're talking about, which basically says, like, in an epic landscape, it's really about the tension between the things. It's not a multiple choice test.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's the tension of, like, I'm me making choices, but there is this greater thing. And thinking about the relationship between the two is like what being human is.
Oh yes, I totally
You know?
agree. And the cartoonish imitations of truly heroic stories are those in which the hero essentially never comes up against the thing that Odysseus had
Right.
come up against. Against the Scyllas
Right,
and
right,
Charybdis don't exist. You just sail right past. But
Yeah.
that's not that kind of destroys the heroic. If there's no evil to destroy, and like if Beowulf, if there's no Grendel, thing, if there's no dragon, then he's got nothing to do, there's no story. And then that has to be,
Right.
real. And I think Odysseus does learn. I find, and I'm sure I'm just reading this into it, but later, the next, when his men, he comes to use this language, when they do land on the island of Helios the sun, he takes off to go pray by himself to the gods, help him get out of there. And even before, all those men are killed and they're destroyed, he's learned to use this language. I think that Circe has told him. There's a line here that says, when he wakes up and finds out the men have already cooked, he smells a cookout and he's like, oh crap, I know exactly what's going on. He says, now when the rest had said I to this, I saw the power of destiny devising ill. Sharply I answered without hesitation, Eurylochus, they are with you to a man. I am alone and outmatched, which is a shocking line for Odysseus to say. He's never alone. He's never outmatched. Yeah. But he throws that in with destiny. For that to happen feels like one of these things. And in the face of the men's hunger and despair, and they just simply do the calculus. We starve to death here on the island, or Zeus drowns us out in the ocean.
Yeah.
Whichever one. And they go for, let's eat first and then die. And but he uses that language of destiny. He uses that language of, I found something plotting against me over my head that there's nothing I could do, and it's a little bit of a cheat in the sense that he doesn't die, from it, but nothing really defeats him, but his men do, obviously.
Yeah, no, my seniors just finished Paradise Lost, and in thinking about what you're saying, what Paradise Lost can't have is the added layer of like human will, divine will, fates. There's actually 3 layers of will in the ancient Greek landscape, and the fates supersede everything. There's a reason Odysseus doesn't die, and it's not because Zeus got tired. He's fated to go home, and Zeus can't alter that.
Yeah.
Whereas the god of Paradise Lost doesn't have to. I mean, his will is fate. His will is providence, right? So there isn't this other amorphous like thing controlling the god of Paradise Lost. So it's. I don't want to say it's a simpler landscape because there's nothing simple, but there's one fewer layer of wills. Whereas in the Odyssey right now, what you're talking about also applies to Zeus himself. That there's a force, he's powerless.
It is not. Yeah, it is not the Judeo-Christian God sort of power structure, at all. You're right.
Yeah. My subtle point is the sirens, the existence of them. Number one. But just really thinking about, there's a little paragraph. It's in the Wilson. It's 183, line 183 in book 12.
Okay.
Now the warning's clear, and Odysseus shockingly follows directions. He's not. I mean, he's kind of like my kind of student. I like the rebellious minded kid. I love it when students say, "I know you asked us to write about this, but I was interested in this." Like, I kind of never mind that. Like, to be honest, I'll be honest with you. Yeah, he puts the wax in his ear and he's tied to the mast, and the guy. So he's doing all the things, and we get, the guys have the wax in their ear. He doesn't. He wants to hear the sirens. So here's what they say, and I want to talk about why this is important.
Okay.
Odysseus, come here. You're well known from many stories, glory of the Greeks. Now stop your ship and listen to our voices. All those who pass this way hear honeyed song poured from our mouths. The music brings them joy, and they go on their way with greater knowledge, since we know everything the Greeks and Trojans suffered in Troy by God's will, and we know whatever happens anywhere on earth. I think the key question that I pose to my students is, whatever the sirens say to us, it's the mirror of Esselred in Harry Potter. I'm convinced this is where she got that. J.K. Rowling read classics at Cambridge. She knew this probably in Greek.
Yeah.
You see your deepest fantasies in that magical mirror in Harry Potter. The sirens sing to you the most intoxicating things and thoughts that you don't want to part from. So the stuff they're going to tell Odysseus is the most enticing stuff he could know. So this is, to me, part 2 of what Book 12 teaches us about the truth of Odysseus.
Okay.
They say, one of the last things they say, that this is their parting, like their trump card. They say, look, we know everything the Greeks and Trojans suffered in Troy. So what that tells me is that Odysseus doesn't feel like anybody understands him from maybe the moment he left Ithaca to now. And the very idea that like he could be understood by anybody would be so appealing. This is how the sirens get him to try to stay. Is nothing sexy. We're not promising you goddesses. He's had goddesses.
Yeah.
Eternal life. He's been offered eternal life. You know what Odysseus wants? For someone to understand him, because no one has. So I just think, so who's Odysseus as far as we can see? He's broken by murders he's committed, even ones that are justified. I agree with you, but like people died, blood on his hands that he chose preemptively breaks him. So there's a bit of a conscience there. And then the fact that he feels probably quite alone and not understood in any significant way. This is the 2 key things of pieces of his heart that I see in Book 12.
Are those the last 2? I'm just looking at the Fitzgerald translation. It's really different. Are those the last 2 little sections of their song that you were reading? Like the bottom lines of it?
Yeah, so I read about 9 or 10 lines. So it's, you're well known. So they stroke his ego, very clever. They know who Odysseus is. They call him the glory of the Greeks, very clever. They tell him literally to like stop and listen. And they basically say like, you should stop because we know what you've been through. We understand you. And I'm just thinking, Paul, of like how many, I don't want to play this card every single time, but how many veterans do we know that return home from war?
Yeah.
That when they're asked, like, what was it like? Like, how the hell can I talk to you about it?
Yeah.
I mean, I remember older relatives saying this about World War II. Like, what am I going to talk to you in my living room about this 50 years? Like, what is that? I can't do that.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, like in a very human way, Paul. Right? There's something deeply true about what the sirens are signifying here, right?
Yeah.
No one can
It's not
understand
cheap.
what you've been.
It's not cheap or salacious, like you said, or like it's sometimes portrayed. It's the opposite of that. Maybe the most expensive, and the deepest.
Yeah. This to me is the greatest test of his commitment to his mission.
When you play a game, when you perform, a song, or you want to come back and tell people about it, but the stakes aren't death in those performances, and the stakes have been death, and you've come through. You do want to be understood by, about what you've gone through and what you achieved and what you accomplished and what you lost. Just understanding, not even just bragging, but understanding. But the fact that you went through that divides you from everyone else almost irretrievably. And so, that is what you want. And I remember asking my uncle, who had been on 2 tours in Vietnam, and as my dad had told me, he had seen horrific things, but I remember as a pretty probably 12 or 13 asking him about it in some awkward, really insensitive way, I'm sure. And he was like, "Oh, we don't talk about that. We don't talk about that." And I thought, oh man, I made a mistake. I shouldn't have asked him, but it was kind of true. But behind that was, he probably would have liked to have had somebody, not me, not his 13-year-old, nephew. Right. He was just digging around for for superficial stories, but to really be heard and really be understood. I think it's a great example, Jay, and it's a great example of the subtle thing, because I've read it with classes, but I don't hover over this. And if you're going through,
I haven't either.
no, this is new for you.
No. Yeah.
I really haven't done it, but given what's at stake in it, like you say, this is the place. Like, what are the sirens tempting him with? If your question, which should always be on the tip of our brains, is who is Odysseus? That's what ends up being the most compelling thing. When I fell in love with this book, it was whenever I realized I wanted to be Odysseus. And so when you identify at that level, then your question is always, who is this person? Who is this person? And and this is a great place, to find it.
The only other character that matches the sort of protean shape-shifting nature of Odysseus to me is Hamlet. And although Hamlet's not a veteran, I think there's like a layered brokenness to him that makes him really complicated and interesting. And I think there's a layered brokenness to Odysseus that makes him it's very different, but it makes him complicated and interesting. And the stories are packaged differently, shaped differently, and all that. But I think I think both of those men move around in their world completely alone, no matter how many people are around them.
Oh, yes. And Hamlet, I don't think there's a moment anything like this in Hamlet where he thinks he might be able to connect with someone, or where he thinks there's no siren, in this that I can think of.
I think to be honest, not to veer away, I think the Gravedigger's it. And I think if that scene isn't interrupted by the funeral, of Ophelia, and I'm sorry if that's spoiling. You had 400 years to read it, folks. So I think if that funeral doesn't interrupt, I envision Hamlet taking him out for beers and that conversation going on forever. That's the only time Hamlet's probably been matched.
Right.
That's it.
Right. I totally agree. He feels like, whether he's right or not, he feels like he's above everyone else, for sure. Even Claudius, who's pretty scary, but that's a good point. That would have been a completely different play. Those two could have started their own kingdom, kingdom.
I want that play. Yeah,
exactly. That's part of the darkness, of the Hamlet play, is that, I think he's given up on communication. He's given up on connecting with other people, if he won't even try with Ophelia, So anyway. All right. So we're moving on to part three, the lingering question. My lingering questions center on the Scylla, the Charybdis, and the Sirens. Those three things are among the most famous things from the book. They've made it into idioms and pop culture, in various ways. In English, so they're known even if you don't know you know them. However, within the context of the story, I want to say, even given all the talk we've done about them in this episode, I don't understand them. I don't understand what they are. And I tell you what I mean by that. In the story, throughout the Odyssey, almost everything you read has an upfront element to it, or explanation to it, that makes it make sense in a natural world sort of way. Even something like a Cyclops, a monster living on an island, that raises goats and eats and drinks and is gross, all sort of makes sense in an ordinary world way. Yeah. Then you can take a second layer and read it and say, what is the vision of the Cyclops? What does it mean for them to be a Cyclops? What does it mean to be a blinded Cyclops? How does that change, the Cyclops? What kind of a obstacle was this for Odysseus and his intellect and his skill? For these three things, the Scylla, the Charybdis, the Sirens, I don't know what they are. They don't make sense to me up front. There's not a prima facie explanation for them in which you say, oh yeah, okay. Like what are they? Okay, so the Charybdis might be the easiest to read as a whirlpool. You hear that read as it seems like a geyser, kind of a whirlpool thing. Okay, well, what's a six-headed beast? What is that with three rows of razor sharp teeth, like a T-Rex? What is an island of sirens who makes a song? And siren, I guess, etymologically, you can get to like whistling wind or destructive wind or something like that. Okay, but why is that so seductive? Why do you have to tie yourself to a pole before you want to dive in and hear the wind blowing? I don't think so. it's difficult for me to come up with other examples in the book where even sort of strange things don't have an upfront explanation that I get. For these three, for me, all the money is in the interpretive side of it. All the money is in the mythological or metaphoric or symbolic side of these things. But up front, I don't get it. I don't understand it. And
I think it's really fair.
You know what I mean? And for our particular reading, or the approach really that I take to reading, teaching high school literature, I've always taken my chief approach to all the books I take is, what I say, sort of staying between the covers. Basically, for students who are going to do much deeper readings of the Odyssey, I think the best way I can serve that future college level reading is to give them a really powerful level, basically at the narrative level. A really strong getting through the facts, sort of a grammar, logic, rhetoric, but within the context of not a lot of outside research, but of reading the story and understanding the story as a composed, singular, discrete piece of work. Even though I know there's history, there's all sorts of commentary and everything outside of it, I don't pay attention to it because of our particular audience or the way I take them. So given that, all the books need to work on this. I need to be able to read this with students without them having a degree in classics or without them knowing Greek, at any level, and for it to work. And the book does. And this chapter does, but taking that approach, I don't get these things. What are they?
Yeah, and I think I was actually thinking about that. And I think this year I started poking around. I don't have the same exact view. I think our hesitance to dig too deeply into secondary material is rooted in the same concern that anybody been to graduate school or anybody of a certain ilk you can dive so deeply into the secondary material that you could forget about the primary material. But I do think it isn't necessarily bad.
No.
If you have the original audience of this poem, if you're just listening to this somewhere, 2,500 years ago-ish, you would have known some things that you and I don't know, frankly. Right. So it's okay to look stuff up if you have a question. I think your concern is right. I don't want to let someone's interpretation of this here's to me the distinction. Okay. I don't want to let someone's interpretation completely shape my interpretation. But if I could learn something biographically about Scylla that helps me read the poem, that's fine.
Yes.
So with that in mind, I'd like to totally break your rule right now. Can I do that?
Yeah, I just want to say before you do that, my other motivation for it is to sort of live by example. You're driving at students to get them to read. And implicit in that drive is that if you go home tonight and read the 20 pages I assigned and give yourself over to it, you'll be able to do it. I'm assigning you a book that is at some level accessible to you and that will work for you at the level of this is your homework, for tonight. And so often I have done it in class, said, I'll do the same thing, I promise. Or I ask them, don't look at SparkNotes. Don't look up exit. I want you to come to class discussion with your authentic original reading of the book. And so I'll say, hey, right. I'll bind myself in the same way, and I'll put myself out there and expose myself as a reader along with you. And the theory is both of us can grow as readers, as thinkers, as human beings while doing that. So that's my other sort of pitch. I do take it too far, Jay. I do, but that is my pitch.
No, I have a kid this year. You'd love him. Every inquiry paper he's written for me is a research paper. He's just really interested. He reads tons of fantasy novels. So he looks at this as the best fantasy novel ever. So he wrote a whole paper on Theoclemenus. He wrote a whole paper on Scylla and Charybdis. So I just borrowed from some of the stuff he unearthed. I knew a little bit of this, but not a lot of it. That Scylla was a beautiful nymph loved by a sea god. And Scylla was bathing in the ocean. And Circe poured a potion into the seawater, which transformed her into the creature we see in the Odyssey. So it was that. And then Charybdis, which is also interesting, was the daughter of Poseidon and Earth, or Gaia. And she helped Poseidon in a feud, in a land grab against Zeus, by engulfing all this land in water as if to take it. And Zeus punished her by capturing her and chaining her to a seabed and giving her an insatiable thirst for the ocean. Now, I don't give kids any credit for using mythology websites and copying and pasting that. To me, the reason to do this very occasionally is to then ask the bigger question, which is, how do these stories connect to the stories literally in the Odyssey? Because they do.
Yes. Okay.
You know, these are characters that are punished unjustly and they become monstrous. Well,
Right.
didn't a whole army of people have to go to a war they didn't really want to fight? And frankly, didn't they become monstrous? Didn't Circe not have to turn Odysseus's men's minds into pigs because they were already there?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Which is good. So in that sense, it's illusion. You know, essentially what writers do.
That's all.
You know,
Yeah.
right.
You're
Is
explaining an
illusion.
illusion.
Import, you know, this parallel thing or this contrasting thing for which they get something from. And, you know, I did know that about the Scylla thing, although I'm pretty sure that account comes from Ovid, you know, which would have been pretty late in the game, you know, for, you know, compared to Homer. So I don't know exactly how old that account is. I don't know where Ovid got it. But yeah, that is interesting. You can build out the narrative, build out character stuff from that. And it's interesting. Kierke, you know, Circe says, you got to steer around this awful, awful thing, you know, keeping under her breath, you know, that I created.
Yeah.
But
I was reading, and I don't know if you want to hear it, but Jonathan Shea in his book has a really interesting reflection on your question. Like, what's this doing here? Do you want to hear this paragraph?
Yeah.
So this is from Odysseus in America by Jonathan Shea, and he looks at Scylla and Charybdis as a metaphor for veterans responding to like returning to civilian life. So this is what he says. As a metaphor for some combat veterans' response to the civilian world, this episode, Scylla and Charybdis, has a number of unfortunate echoes. Various powers in the civilian world, the police, the IRS, the Employers Personnel Department, the Department of Social Services, the Social Security Administration, the Veterans Administration, the gas company, the electric company, the telephone company, the Department of Motor Vehicles, the criminal courts, divorce courts, the bank that financed the pickup, the company that insured it, the agency that financed the college loan, the collection agency, the ex-wife's lawyer. These all seem to have the capacity to swoop out of the sky and snatch the veteran, writhing, and carry him to some dark place to devour him. In such a state of vulnerability, they often want to do what Odysseus did, to arm themselves and fight the foe the only way they know how. Direct, courageous, armed action that we associate with military heroism is wildly out of place. There is literally no place for it.
Yeah.
Isn't that brilliant?
Yeah, that's pretty good. Yeah. And they're always going to win too. You're not going to be any of the things on that list. As my classics teacher told me, who I loved, you know, Dr. Richard Spencer, he was just great, but really dark, you know, and he would usually interpose this line when he's talking about mythology for us. And what we learn from this, students, is there is a shaft and you will get it. Like, you know, there is this force, this darkness or whatever, you know, and that had been a guiding principle in his life. He had suffered, you know, and that's what he felt was important. But I remember him telling us that many times. Yeah.
But
it's a good connection.
Yeah. My lingering one connects to the whole idea of how we're really seeing into Odysseus's heart. Because my lingering question is, why is it interesting that Circe seems to know Odysseus better than anyone, maybe other than Athena? In line 49, she's giving him the like sirens advice, and right away she's like, "Oh, well, if you want to hear them though, here's what your guys have to do." Now the subtext of that is she knows he's not a rule guy. And he's going to look for a way to hear them. And after giving him all the dangers he's going to face, and I think you read this from your translation, he says basically, "Tell me the truth, is there no other way? Can I circumvent Charybdis?" And her answer is, "No, you fool. Your mind is still obsessed with deeds of war, but now you must surrender to the gods." You read that from Fitzgerald.
Yes, that's right.
I think she has a very penetrating understanding. I think the sirens and Circe represent the fact that the gods can see into his heart and understand him. The problem is he's a man. He needs men. He needs people to understand him, and none do right now. And that's part of his brokenness. It isn't simply all the combat, all the loss. It's a complete disconnect that's just existentially crippling. And we're reminded of that because the gods get him because they're gods. We see it.
Yeah.
We see Circe and the Sirens completely get like the heart of him, not just external stuff. You want to go home. The heart of him. They get the heart of him.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
but it's not comforting. It's not consoling. It's not the answer.
Exactly.
And that, I mean, talking about jumping ahead and ruining the end. Let's just go ahead and do that. That brings to mind the question: does the place that he finally seeks for it and, you know, risks his life for to find it, you know, comes at the very end of the book, when Penelope and Odysseus are reunited? To me, it's a really good question. Maybe we could revisit it then. Does she believably fulfill that role? But does he have that with her? Do they have unity again?
Yeah.
They stay up all night, you know, the first night back together, they stay up all night talking. You know, he apparently rehashes this whole book, you know, to her.
Well, they don't only talk, Paul, let's be honest. But yeah, they talk.
That's right. I do remember some other passages in there vaguely. Yeah.
No, and I think in light of the fact that we're about to hit book 13, and I think we would both ask this of students, in a book about Nostos, in a book about returning home, the whole point is returning home. You sacrifice, you do everything to return home. You expect the climax, the return home, to be book 24, 22, 23. It's book 13 and we're home. What implicitly is being said is that home is a complicated idea, not simply geography. And if the man we see in book 12 is this broken, a lot of things have to happen for him to be home, not simply a geographical shift.
Yeah, no. And that's what some of the other parallel characters in this book did not realize. You know, coming back home is not just you walking in the front door, you know, putting your keys in the jar.
Right.
That's not,
Honey, I'm home.
Yeah. And it's quite a mess.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, exactly. No, you're completely right. And so in that sense, I think what you said is the subtle point, and that you have found, you know, here in 12 is thematic, you know, thematic of the whole, and is climactic, and is the very thing that's at stake. It's the thing that, you know, in a lot of ways makes the book work for you or not. If you don't believe it in the end, which you might not, then this story's a fail, you know. But so it's good. It's really strong. It's really strong in that sense. Okay, so I think we've covered them. I think we covered our 3 points. We got a good summary in here. There's some inducement to really dig in to this chapter. There's some, you know, some style or approach, you know, specifically that I've laid out pedagogically for how to approach a book like this. You can get lost in. I mean, you can spend, you know, hours and hours and hours and hours and hours just looking up, just Googling, or, you know, searching back through your old college reference books to find more and more facts, because every chapter is full of things like Jay reminded us, references that other readers would have that we don't have. However, there is another way in which you can sort of purposefully tie one hand behind your back and say, is this that kind of story that you can kind of pretty much stay within, stay between the covers of the book, and still have plenty to grow and talk about and do the book justice? I think you can. And hopefully some of these things that Jay and I have brought out, largely from not doing research, are a good example of that, you know? So I'd
absolutely.
say that.
It's a very rich chapter.
It is surprisingly. And I hope it's not depressing for listeners to hear that we're at book 13 and he's home, you know, and we're only halfway through. If you thought getting home was the point, we're not even close. So anyway, all right. Does that do it, Jay? Anything else?
Yeah, that's great. No, I'm good. Thank you, Paul. It was a great chat.
Right. Yeah. Great chat and very good. Thank you for all those things. All right. We'll see you guys next time. Subscribe if you want to get that notification when new episodes go up, and comment as well. Would love to interact with you as you're teaching books like this to the students who are in front of you.